Brooklyn, 1898. The hum of streetcars. The rhythm of ragtime drifting from saloons. The restless pulse of a new America. In this noise and motion, a boy named Jacob Gershwin discovered his destiny. Born to struggling Russian Jewish immigrants, George Gershwin would rise from the crowded tenements to redefine American music itself. His genius was unmistakable from the moment his fingers first touched a piano, an instrument meant for his brother, but destined for him. What began as childhood curiosity became a lifelong pursuit of beauty, rhythm, and reinvention. Gershwin didn't just compose songs, he captured the sound of an era, a nation finding its voice between classical tradition and the wild energy of jazz. This is the story of a prodigy who changed everything, the boy who turned noise into music, and music into magic. George Gershwin, the street sounds that made a legend. At just 15, George Gershwin was already hustling in the heart of Tin Pan Alley, a chaotic stretch of New York City where melodies were sold by the pound and dreams were paid in dimes. His job was simple but grueling: sit at a piano for endless hours, pounding out the latest sheet music to convince publishers and performers to buy it. Surrounded by honking horns, shouting vendors, and rival pianists hammering through thin walls, Gershwin learned to make himself heard, not by volume, but by style. He absorbed everything: the syncopated rhythms of ragtime, the swagger of jazz, and the heartfelt simplicity of street songs sung by immigrants like his own family. Those sounds fused into something new, an unmistakable American energy that no one had ever captured before. Then came Swanee, a song that exploded onto the charts when Al Jolson performed it. Practically overnight, Gershwin went from an anonymous song plugger to one of the hottest young composers in New York. The success of Swanee didn't just make him money, it gave him freedom. Freedom to compose, to experiment, and to chase the sound of modern America. Tin Pan Alley had been his training ground, and Gershwin had learned its greatest lesson: that music, like the city itself, was loud, alive, and endlessly reinventing itself. George Gershwin, When Jazz Met the Symphony. It was 1924, and America was roaring. The cities pulsed with jazz, automobiles, and ambition, and at the center of it all stood a 25-year-old composer with something revolutionary in mind. Paul Whiteman, the self-proclaimed king of jazz, had invited George Gershwin to create a piece that would fuse the raw excitement of jazz with the elegance of classical music. The result would change music forever. Working in a frenzy of inspiration, Gershwin composed Rhapsody in Blue in just a few short weeks, sketching melodies on trains, in cafes, even in his sleep. On February 12, 1924, at New York's Aeolian Hall, the world heard that iconic opening clarinet glissando, a sound that seemed to stretch and laugh at every musical rule ever written. The performance was wild, soulful, unpredictable, a perfect reflection of the restless new America. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some called it too jazzy, others too emotional, but audiences were electrified. They stood and cheered, sensing they had just witnessed something entirely new. Rhapsody in Blue wasn't just a composition, it was a declaration, proof that American music didn't have to imitate Europe anymore. Gershwin had given the nation its own symphony, bold, free, and unmistakably its own. George and Ira Gershwin, the brothers who made Broadway swing. When George Gershwin found his rhythm, his brother Ira found the words. Together, they became Broadway's golden duo, the unstoppable team that turned New York's theater district into a symphony of laughter, wit, and melody. In the late 1920s, their partnership produced an unbroken string of hits: Funny Face, Strike Up the Band, Girl Crazy, shows that sparkled with jazzy charm and a distinctly American optimism. Their music didn't just entertain, it spoke the language of the streets, full of hope, humor, and hustle. But while audiences sang along to I Got Rhythm and Embraceable You, George was reaching for something deeper. He didn't want to be remembered only as a Broadway hitmaker, he wanted to be recognized as a serious composer, capable of blending the sophistication of classical music with the heartbeat of jazz. That ambition led to his next great leap, the Concerto in F. A bold, exuberant experiment that placed a jazz piano at the center of a symphony orchestra. The gamble paid off. Critics began to see Gershwin not just as a songwriter, but as a visionary. On Broadway and beyond, he had proven that American music could be as grand, expressive, and timeless as anything from Europe, and a whole lot more fun. George Gershwin, the American who turned Paris into music. By the mid-1920s, George Gershwin had conquered Broadway, but he wanted something more. He longed for the prestige of European classical music, so he packed his bags and set off for Paris, hoping to study under the legendary Nadia Boulanger, mentor to the great composers of the age. Yet when Gershwin played for her, she simply smiled and refused him, not out of dismissal, but admiration. "Why try to make you another composer?" she said, "when you're already Gershwin." Wandering the streets of Paris, Gershwin found a new muse, not in classrooms, but in the heartbeat of the city itself. The honking taxi horns, the chatter of cafes, the elegance of the boulevards, all became notes in his imagination. Out of that whirlwind came An American in Paris, a musical love letter to the city of light, alive with the rhythm of travel, romance, and self-discovery. When it premiered, critics were divided. Some dismissed it as too jazzy, too modern for polite concert halls. But audiences understood immediately. The piece captured the thrill of being young, bold, and out of place in a beautiful foreign world. In blending Parisian sophistication with American swagger, Gershwin had done it again. He turned life itself into music. George Gershwin, fame, frustration, and the sound of restlessness. By the early 1930s, George Gershwin was living the dream, a millionaire celebrity, a darling of New York's elite, and one of the most admired composers in America. He collected modern art, painted portraits in his spare time, and threw glamorous parties filled with movie stars, writers, and musicians. Everyone wanted to be near him, the charming genius who could sit at a piano and make the room feel alive. But behind the glitter and applause, Gershwin was growing restless. Success had brought him everything except peace. He longed to break free from Broadway formulas and dig deeper into the mysteries of sound. Late into the night, he experimented with new symphonic forms, complex rhythms, and harmonies no one had heard before. He was searching for something more profound, a musical truth that fame alone couldn't provide. Those closest to him noticed subtle changes. Gershwin couldn't sleep. He suffered from insomnia, bursts of energy followed by exhaustion, and unpredictable mood swings. Friends dismissed it as artistic temperament, the cost of genius. But in reality, these were early signs of the illness that would one day silence his music forever. Beneath the applause, a quiet struggle had begun, the kind no one could hear. George Gershwin, the dream that became America's first great opera. In 1934, George Gershwin set out to create something no one had ever dared before, an opera that captured the soul of America. His inspiration came from Du Bois-Hayward's novel, Porgy, a story about love, poverty, and resilience among black communities in the South. Many doubted that a white composer from Brooklyn could portray that world with truth or dignity. But Gershwin wasn't interested in imitation, he wanted authenticity. He traveled to Folly Island, South Carolina, to listen, learn, and live among the people whose voices would inspire his music. He absorbed the spirituals, gospel rhythms, and blues cadences of Catfish Row, blending them into something profound and deeply human. When Porgy and Bess premiered in 1935 with an all-black cast, it was revolutionary. The opera pulsed with emotion. Songs like Summertime and It Ain't Necessarily So would become timeless classics. Critics were divided. Some found it too modern, others too bold. But Gershwin had changed the rules again. He had brought opera out of European halls and into the heart of American life. Yet, behind the curtain, the effort took its toll: endless rehearsals, sleepless nights, and growing exhaustion. His masterpiece had come at a cost, one his body was already beginning to pay. George Gershwin, the brilliant mind that slipped away. By 1936, something unsettling began to shadow George Gershwin's genius. The once vibrant composer who had electrified Broadway and concert halls was changing. He complained of blinding headaches, sudden bursts of irritation, and strange sensations, like the smell of burning rubber or garbage that no one else could detect. Friends whispered that he seemed distracted, even confused. During rehearsals, he forgot passages of his own music, At the piano, his fingers sometimes froze, betraying the effortless coordination that had once defined him. Doctors, unaware of the real danger, blamed stress, exhaustion, or emotional strain. They prescribed rest, even psychoanalysis, believing his symptoms were all in his head. Ironically, they were, just not in the way they thought. A malignant brain tumor was quietly growing inside Gershwin's right temporal lobe, pressing on the part of his brain that governed memory, emotion, and creativity. As the months passed, his condition worsened. During a 1937 rehearsal for Rhapsody in Blue, he suddenly collapsed, his body betraying him for the last time. Only then did doctors realize the truth. Surgery came too late. On July 11, 1937, at just 38 years old, George Gershwin, the man who gave America its musical heartbeat, was gone. His mind, once overflowing with melody, had fallen tragically silent. George Gershwin, the day the music stopped. On July 11, 1937, the world lost one of its brightest stars. George Gershwin, the boy from Brooklyn who turned jazz into high art, fell into a sudden coma at just 38 years old. Rushed to Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles. Surgeons discovered the cause, a massive brain tumor. In a desperate attempt to save him, they operated, but the tumor had already spread too deeply. Hours later, the man whose melodies had defined a generation took his final breath. News of his death stunned the nation. Radio stations interrupted their programs, Broadway went silent. Presidents, musicians, and everyday Americans alike sent heartfelt tributes. Composer Jerome Kern called Gershwin's passing the end of an era. Ira Gershwin, his lifelong creative partner and brother, was inconsolable. His other half, his musical mirror, was gone. At his funeral in New York, thousands gathered in mourning. The air was filled with the haunting strains of Rhapsody in Blue, played by orchestras across the country in his honor. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, as if the whole world had paused to listen one last time. George Gershwin's life was heartbreakingly brief, but his music, bold, emotional, unmistakably American, ensured that his voice would never fade. The curtain fell, but the melody still lingers. George Gershwin, the man who changed the sound of the world. In the years following George Gershwin's untimely death, doctors revisited his mysterious decline. What had once been dismissed as exhaustion or hysteria was later revealed to be a devastating neurological illness, a malignant brain tumor that had stolen his body. Not his mind. Even in his final days, Gershwin's creative spark never dimmed. He was still composing, still chasing melodies that seemed to come from some place beyond reach. But his true legacy wasn't confined to notes on a page. Gershwin's music bridged worlds that had never met before: jazz and classical, high art and popular culture, white and black America. He captured the rhythm of the modern age, the pulse of the city, the dream of a nation inventing itself. From Rhapsody in Blue to Porgy and Bess, his sound became the heartbeat of the 20th century, daring, emotional, and unmistakably American. Modern composers and artists still look to Gershwin as proof that genius doesn't belong to privilege or tradition. It can rise from the crowded streets of Brooklyn, from anyone bold enough to listen to their own rhythm. He lived only 38 short years. Yet in that brief time, George Gershwin changed the sound of the world forever. His music didn't just echo an era, it defined it. And it still sings today.